In the annals of human history, every inch of land, every sea, and every realm where humans dare to tread becomes a battlefield. Where there is life, there will be war. Human history is deeply tied to the spaces they occupy or desire to control, whether for resources, power, or survival. Since the virtual landscape is now a space people occupy, Indonesia is calling all keyboard warriors to build their new cyber army. On the 3rd September 2024, Joko Widodo ordered the formation of the Indonesian Cyber Force, which will be Indonesia's main cyber warfare arm of the Indonesian Armed Forces. This move was made after Indonesia suffered a few cyber attacks from 4 undisclosed countries. But the tipping point was when the Indonesian National Data Center was hacked back in June. Now, this seems to be a repeating problem in Indonesia. We can't seem to read the future. Indonesia is so used to being unchallenged that we don't take evolving threats seriously until shit hits the fan. We literally have an expression called tunggu sampai kena batunya. That means we'll change our attitude after we are hit with the consequences. Your mama! But to be fair, we did our lip service to cyber warfare by making a national cyber and crypto agency. Even then, it operated as a civilian agency instead of a military one. So there is stuff that the agency can't do. Anyways, Indonesia finally creating a cyber warfare wing is a step I welcome and appreciate since it reflects to our government's commitment to conduct massive surveillance on the people to defend our cyberspace from foreign encroachment. And I feel like it's a necessary step to be taken. They should have created this back in the early 2000s. Think about it. Cyberspace is slowly becoming a part of our everyday lives, and cyber defense is more important than it ever is. It protects your internet connection, social media communication, your Instagram search bar, YouTube algorithm, and even your enhanced collection from the reach of foreign enemies. Could you imagine if someone all the way from Pudong, Shanghai is snooping on your screenshot gallery filled with thirst traps of your spicy DMs with your ex? Oh, imagine the things that they could do if they have access to that information. And our neighbors have began adopting cyber warfare formations to protect their citizens' degenerate files, like Malaysia and Singapore. And so I say again, it's about damn time. Indonesia as a country lacks a lot of cyber infrastructure, while the world is beginning to adopt cyberspace as a place to build infrastructure. And while our military strength is enough to deter an armed invasion, our cyber defense is absolutely lacking, despite Indonesia having a slew of different government and military agencies that specializes in cyberspace. This brings us to the question, why aren't our cyber agencies doing enough for our cyber defense? The thing about these cyber agencies is that they do not specialize in warfare, but rather intelligence. Let's separate warfare and information from each other. Warfare refers to the organized and systematic use of armed forces to achieve political, economic, or social objectives through violent conflict. Intelligence refers to the collection, analysis, and dissemination of information regarding an enemy's capabilities, intentions, and activities. The National Crypto and Cyber Agency, or the BSSN, for example, is not a cyber unit. It is an intelligence agency at its core. While it is also responsible for defending Indonesia's cyberspace, it is not equipped with the resources to conduct defenses on a warring scale. And that's the problem with all these cyber agencies in Indonesia, in that being an agency under the government or the military, they are either not authorized to do deterrence, are not legally equipped to conduct mass-scale defense, or are too scattered to be able to work in conjunction with one another. In hindsight, they all give each other the cold shoulder like your mom if you don't finish your broccoli. Finish your broccoli, guys. Let me take you guys back to 2001. 9/11 could have been prevented. Al-Qaeda's information integrity was so thoroughly compromised that the DIA, the CIA, the FBI, the DHS, the IRS, the Salvation Army, and even the Girl Scout of the USA had intel on their operations. However, these agencies do not work in tandem, and some even competed with one another, leading to the horrific Two Towers incident where Saruman led his army to besiege the World Trade Center with his army of Urukais. Yeah, I think that's what happened. Imagine if these agencies coordinated with each other. New York wouldn't be overrun by Urukais, and Orthanc would not fall to Saruman. That's exactly the problem. Nobody is working with each other. The government agencies worked in isolated silos, and they aren't even coherent fighting force to combat foreign cybersecurity threats. Our cyber defense is practically a mob of snitches and gossiping grandmas against an army of grizzled Marines in the body of 20-year-old weebs. And that is why it is more important than ever to establish a cyber warfare arm of our military so that we can go toe-to-toe and not only defend ourselves from DNS attacks, but strike back. To serve as a medium for all aspects of Indonesian cyberspace defense so that agencies and bodies could coordinate properly to protect your search history from the US Cyber Command or the PLA Unit 61398. But that's not just the issue I want to talk about. There's a lot the cyber warfare branch will have to resolve, but I will mainly focus on two issues. First is the issue of, you guessed it, who gets the pie? The Indonesian Armed Forces is its own political entity entirely. They're notorious for their politicking, and each of the branches only get along during the Armed Forces anniversary every 5th of October. And that's why the position of the commander of the Indonesian Armed Forces exists as a 5-star position as the highest commanding officer of the Indonesian military. Typically in a democratic country, that Indonesia claims itself to be, the ultimate authority of the military falls on the Ministry of Defense or a council of chief of staffs or even a joint chief of staff under a civilian political minister who reports directly to the head of state or government. This is to ensure that there is a high degree of civilian control over the military whereby at least 2 layers of its decision-making is under civilian exercise. In Indonesia, we have none of that. Because we love to do more and taking action instead of that pesky democratic bureaucracy. The commander normally coordinates with the Ministry of Defense and is given a quite great deal of autonomy to do whatever the he likes with the military, while directly answerable to the President of Indonesia. The way this works is because the military has always dominated the government of Indonesia, so that the role of the commander of the armed forces protects the military interest inside the state, or to be easily controlled by whichever president is in charge. It really depends on how you see it, really. So naturally, who the cyber warfare branch falls into will certainly be a squabble between the endless ranks of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Because obviously, you'd want to have a military officer being at the top of this branch instead of a 16-year-old hacker from Bandung who has never bathed since he dropped out of school. Now, looking at our history, there's a huge chance that this cyber warfare branch will be headed by an officer of the Indonesian Army. Now, let me explain to you why. The Indonesian Army has always been the most powerful branch of the Indonesian Armed Forces. 2 of our presidents have been military generals, with 1 more general becoming a president, and army officers used to sit in the parliament before the 1998 Reformation. Even after the army can no longer indulge in politics, there's still a fierce political entity. Prabowo will, or by the time this video is released, has seized the presidential office, paving the way for military officers into the government. And most importantly, most of the officers are army officers. By making the leading figure of the army, there is a chance that the cyber warfare branch will be politically protected and is able to cut through many bureaucratic red tapes. That's not to say that other branches are too, but the closer and familiar you are with power, the more leverage you get. The least likely officers to get this position would come from the Navy. Because historically, the Indonesian Navy has always been the most remote branch in the armed forces. Most officers sit outside of the political spree, and they aren't really interested in indulging with central politics, opting to get out the army's way or, being stuck in the middle of nowhere in the sea, surrounded by men and no entertainment. But again, it won't close the possibility since the Navy has their own cyber unit. The strongest competition would definitely be between the Army and the Air Force. Now, the Air Force, being the branch primarily reliant on electronic warfare, has a pretty dependable cyber unit. However, the Air Force normally does not have the same political pull as the Army. Disclaimer, most of these are not based on research, but rather empirical assumption. It's hard to determine which branch has the most capable cyber branches since the nature of their operations are clandestine and obviously classified due to national security, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But let me continue this discussion. Again, I feel like the choice whether or not the Army, Air Force, or Navy will handle the cyber warfare branch will be decided on what the government expects of the new force. Do they want more political support and a closer tie to the ruling regime? Then Army it is. Do they need a leadership with an expertise in technological advanced equipment like radars, satellites? Then the Air Force probably has the technical know-how. To identify this, we need to understand the key trend in Indonesia's cyber warfare branch and political conditions. And based on my observations, an Army commander will be more likely to take command over the cyber warfare branch. An Army commander that is close to the Prabowo regime will have the political muscle and priority to safeguard the interest of the fledgling cyber branch. But knowledge on military technology, cyber defense, and software is obviously required. One more thing to note is that I very obviously did not include the police officers in this equation because they're law enforcement. I know the police are basically a paramilitary force to the president, but let's normalize keeping law enforcement separate from military assets. Though feel free to share what you think in the comments down below. The second issue I'd like to raise is how to prevent an overlap in jurisdiction. You see, the National Crypto and Cyber Agency is set up to oversee both civilian and government cyber defense, so a creation of a cyber force can overlap with the cyber agency. The question is, why do we need to have a cyber agency when cyber warfare and defense will be taken over by the cyber force? The Ministry of Information and the Ministry of Defense has the power over the National Cyber Defense Policy, and each branch has their own cyber defense body. What should the cyber agency actually do? This is a government body that has failed to protect countless of citizens' data back a few months ago. But to be fair, it's because they were equipped and given less leeway with their operations. Indonesia will also have to address the issue of having two cyber formations with redundant functions. My proposal is that the cyber agency should focus on signals intelligence and let cyber defense be handled by the new cyber force. Indonesia, as a huge country navigating the labyrinth of international politics, must have a government agency responsible for collecting and managing intelligence data from and for foreign intelligence, especially since global tensions are rising, with the conflicts in Ukraine, Palestine, and South China Sea becoming even more intense. I think a government body to monitor and collect signals intelligence would leverage our position on diplomacy and geopolitics. This way, the cyber force will be free to establish cyber defense network and wage cyber warfare without clashing or overlapping with the cyber agency. A clear distinction between a body that operates on intelligence gathering and military capabilities would help out a lot in determining how we could proceed. The future of Indonesia lies in how we map our cyberspace. The formation of this cyber warfare branch of our military could potentially bolster our defense, create a deterrence effect, and give us offensive capabilities to retaliate if we are attacked in our cyberspace. Now, the problem is, how will our neighbors view us now? Will they view us as a threat? Countries with stronger cyber capabilities like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Singapore will definitely see this as a challenge. Think of it like this. You live in Texas, and you and your friends who always carry around concealed firearms suddenly have to contend with an additional friend carrying a firearm that they've just bought and never used or never practiced with. You're never going to know what they're gonna do with that gun. And that's the thing. The cyber warfare branch will signal an emerging player in the Southeast Asian cyberspace, and no doubt, China will begin seriously seeing us as a threat. And this is going to be a problem that Indonesia needs to communicate to its neighbors, convincing them that the shiny gun they bought, it's not just to shoot them up. But countries are pretty much just like your cute gamer girl you meet on Valorant. They always have trust issues. Maybe it's time for Indonesia to seriously size up its strength, not just in cyberspace, but anywhere else as well. We're the fourth largest navy in the world, but our submarines still sank in friendly waters. We are the biggest army in Southeast Asia, but some of our bullets can't even fit the chamber they're supposed to fit in. Our Air Force is still pretty decent, but it looks like we're a former Soviet state that just joined NATO back in 2020. I'm not all up for an open conflict. War is definitely bad for everyone, except if you're part of the military-industrial complex. But as the Roman saying goes, si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, be prepared for war. If you want to continue discussing about this, join my Discord server. Link is on the description. Don't forget to leave a comment down below to tell me what you think. Don't forget to like and also subscribe. Subscribe, motherfuckers. Like, I can literally see how much you guys are watching my videos, but you don't subscribe. You don't subscribe, man. Like, that's wild. You guys are wild for that, man. I swear to God. Subscribe. Stop watching and not subscribing. I'm supposed to convince you guys. I'm a buzzer. You see, I feel like some of my ideas are actually pretty decent. And if you guys want to continue listening to my ideas, then show me some support by subscribing. Subscribe, motherfuckers. I'll see you guys in the next episode of the Based Indonesian Show.
Subscribe to the Based Indonesian Show. Dijamin halal.